The Ember War Chronicles. Part 7 of the Galactic War Saga. Echoes Beyond the Rift. Chapter 1. The Shatterwake Signal. The stars had grown quiet. Too quiet. In the emptiness beyond Virelia's collapsed orbit, the void trembled with the kind of silence that made battle-hardened commanders nervous. It wasn't peace. It was the breath drawn before scream. From the bridge of the Talon Requiem, Admiral Kael Draven watched the distant fragments of the world they'd once sworn to protect drift like ghostly ruins across the black. A planet erased, its core shattered by the Leviathan's passing and the forbidden weapon that had twisted reality to stop it. He remembered the flash, brighter than a sun, when Lyra Vale had made the impossible choice to ignite the rift chain. She had vanished with the blast, her signal gone, her fate unknown. That was 3 standard weeks ago. Now, something stirred at the edges of that wound. Incoming distortion, Commander Shy called out, her voice steadier than most on the bridge. Graviton's signature resembles rift energy, but it's not consistent. Something's trying to stabilize. Kael stepped closer to the main holosphere as it bloomed with writhing bands of light. The distortion pulsed with unnatural rhythm, like a heartbeat. The crew fell silent, watching the signal crawl across the projection. It wasn't a simple spatial anomaly. It had a pattern. A message. No, not a message. A memory. It was her voice. Faint, broken, echoing through static. Kael's pulse quickened. "Play it again," he said. The sound looped, fragmented syllables flickering through layers of noise. "Not gone. Breach. Waking beyond." Shy turned to him, eyes narrowing. "That sounds like Vale." Kael didn't reply immediately. His hand curled into a fist as his mind raced. This was no ordinary transmission. Lyra Vale was presumed lost to the rift, dissolved in the energy required to collapse the Leviathan. But if she had survived, or if something of her remained, patch it through to High Command, he said at last. Encrypt the signal with Omega clearance. I want a full analysis run, rift harmonics, memory engrams, everything. Shy gave a curt nod and relayed the order. Kael turned his gaze back to the void. He'd stood here before, watching impossible threats rip the galaxy apart. Arcborn detonations, the awakening of the Vaultborn, the Leviathan's harrowing scream as it tore through reality itself. But this was different. This wasn't the return of an enemy. This was the return of something worse. Something changed. Far across the stars, within the rift itself, Lyra Vale drifted between moments. She no longer knew how long she had been awake, or if she had ever truly slept. Time was a concept the rift rejected, past, present, future, all frayed and folded together like broken wings. Her body was gone, her voice fragmented, but her will, her presence, remained, and something had begun to hear her. The rift was not empty. It was watching. The echoes of the war she'd helped to end pulsed around her. Glimpses of battlefields, memories of screams, the flash of Virus's eyes as he died for her. The rift devoured memories, but it could not consume her resolve. A light emerged from the endless dark. Not a star, not a beacon, a doorway. Shaped like an eye, endless and ancient. She reached for it, not with hands, but with thought. The moment she touched the threshold, the rift screamed. Not in pain, in recognition. It knew her name. On a station orbiting the broken moon of Durellus Prime, a technomancer named Havek's lore tuned into the anomaly before anyone else. Not out of duty, but obsession. His people, the Archivars, had once chronicled the rise and fall of civilizations in secret. But Havek's had seen what the galaxy now feared to admit, that the rift was awakening again. He stared at the spectral image on his display, Lyra Vale's last known biometric echo, overlaid with fresh waveform data. It didn't make sense. She should be dead. She was dead. But the rift did not care for the rules of the living. And now it wanted something back. Havek's began the broadcast that would change everything. To any surviving command node of the Galactic Accord, this is Havek's lore transmitting from Station Telric 7. I have decoded the signal buried in the rift's new emissions. It contains a message. It contains a name. Lyra Vale lives. And then the screen cut to black. In the depths of the burned world of Amarith, exiled Arkborn survivors stirred from deep hibernation. They felt her return in their dreams. Fractured flashes of the one who had defied fate and burned with the fury of 2 stars. She was not returning alone. Whatever had touched her inside the rift, whatever had whispered its knowledge into her soul, was coming back with her. Kael stood alone in his quarters, replaying the signal again. Not gone, breach, waking beyond. His thoughts drifted to everything they'd lost, to the sacrifices, to her. If there was a chance, any chance, she was still alive, they had to try. Even if it meant tearing open the stars again. Prepare the fleet, he said quietly, eyes hardening. We're going into the rift. Chapter 2, Wounds of the Living. The medical bay aboard the Talon Requiem had grown quiet since the last Leviathan incursion. No longer filled with the screams of the dying or the crackle of emergency repair drones, it now harbored something far heavier: memory. Commander Illyra Tane walked its halls in silence, her boots echoing softly across the polished black floors. In the far corner, past the row of cryostasis pods and regeneration chambers, she stopped beside a sealed observation room. Inside floated Captain Arelvox. Suspended in a precision tank of amber nutrient fluid, his body was still broken, burned down to bone in places, skin regrown in patches, organs kept alive by borrowed miracles. He had survived the blast wave from the rift chain's ignition, but barely. It was Lyra's sacrifice that had kept him from being atomized entirely. And now, only the whisper of machines kept him tethered to life. Illyra placed her gloved palm against the glass. He'd fought beside her on the ruins of Icaron. He'd stood defiant when the Arkborn breached the domes of Halcyon's reach. And in the final moments before the rift opened, he had shouted her name, told her to run. Before the waves swallowed everything, she hadn't run. Now, she was one of the last senior tacticians left in the sector. Behind her, the medbay lights dimmed slightly. Someone entered. "I thought you'd be in the war room," Kael's voice said. She didn't turn. "You wouldn't want me there," she replied. "Not like this." Kael stepped up beside her, arms folded behind his back. He looked older now, not in his face, but in his posture, like the weight of command had begun to settle into his bones. He'd carried the burden of watching a friend die, Lyra. Now he carried the uncertainty of her return. "He's stabilizing," Kael said quietly. "For now," Illyra answered. They watched Arel float for a moment longer. And then Kael added the signal. It was her. "We're assembling a rift strike fleet. Not to invade. To reach her." Illyra finally turned, her eyes narrowing. "You think she's still alive?" Kael didn't blink. "I think she's something else now. And I think she's in pain." A silence settled between them before Illyra spoke again. "If she's changed, if the rift twisted her, then I'll bring her home anyway," Kael said. "No matter what she's become." Across the shattered lunar plains of Arkan's halo, the ground cracked open with unnatural precision. In the underground sanctum of the former vault-born citadel, a pulse of energy flared once, silent to the ear, but deafening to those attuned to the remnants of rift-born influence. Juno Ceres, once a child of the vault, now exiled and hunted, crouched in the dust as her implants spiked with heat. She gasped, nearly losing consciousness, as the memory wave surged through her system. It was not a hallucination. It was a tether, an anchor being thrown from beyond space. She saw Lyra, standing barefoot on an impossible landscape, light bleeding from her eyes, whispering things in a language that wasn't language. Behind her, titanic shapes moved, too vast for the mind to hold. Machines? Gods? Broken souls? Juno screamed and collapsed. Beside her, her protector, a reconditioned war sentinel named Mara, caught her and steadied her limbs. Sparks danced along Juno's spine, and her eyes fluttered. "The rift is calling her," Juno whispered. "It knows her name." Mara tilted her head. "And what does it want?" Juno slowly sat up. To wake. Kael stood before the High Accord Council a day later, facing down 12 hollow projectors and a sea of skepticism. "You're asking to take an entire strike fleet into the rift," Chancellor Rivek said, his voice thick with disbelief. "Into the one place we have no comprehension of, based on an unverified signal from a woman who is presumed dead." "Not presumed. Missing," Kael corrected. "And the signal matches her rift signature." "Precisely. Down to the molecular resonance." Another counselor, one of the newer corporate liaisons, leaned forward. "And if she's been compromised? If the thing that comes back wearing her voice isn't Lyra Vale anymore?" Kael held his ground. "Then we stop it. But we owe her the chance. We owe ourselves the truth. The war with the Leviathan cost us billions. The Arcborn nearly unmade reality itself. And in the end, it was her who stopped it. Don't we at least owe her a retrieval?" The chamber fell quiet. Authorization was granted, not because of belief, but because of fear. Later that night, Kael stood in the observation dome alone, watching the fleet prepare. Dreadnoughts rearmed, carrier wings reconfigured for deep rift traversal, and rift glider pilots awakened from stasis. He remembered the last time a fleet was assembled like this. The push into Virilia, the desperate final stand, the burning trails of fallen starfighters crossing the stars like tears. His fingers closed around the talon-shaped pendant she'd given him before the last battle. Just a shard of old tech, reforged into something beautiful. She had told him once, "We are made of scars, but we choose what they become." Now it was time to choose again. The rift awaited, and Lyra Vale, dead or alive, was calling them back. Chapter 3. The Signal That Should Not Exist. The core of the Talon Requiem pulsed like a quiet heart, steady, artificial, unnerving. Even for a ship born from post-Leviathan engineering, this place felt too silent. No clang of engineers. No idle chatter of soldiers. Only a hum, low, resonant, nearly alive. Kael stood at the edge of the datasphere, gazing into the rift signature interface. It was the same machine that had once confirmed the destruction of Halcyon's Reach during the gate collapse. The same one that tracked the fragmented pulse of the Arcborn when they tore the skies of Vega Prime. But now, it displayed something different, something impossible. A signal, thin and fluctuating, emanated from within Rift Sector 12, an area previously marked uninhabitable. The waveform wasn't random. It was rhythmic, repeating, structured, and unmistakably human. The AI core, tethered through the glass column of the room, shimmered with a voice. "The frequency is triangulating now, Commander," it said. "Pattern integrity is holding at 67%. Kael leaned in. "Filter for known cadence structure. Run it against deep Lyra neural archives. Class C memory sculpts. All of it." The AI hesitated, then confirmed. 98.4% match to Lyra Vale's cortical map. Enhanced by psionic imprint from the Leviathan Gate. Kael's jaw clenched. The last time someone said Lyra's name that way, it was Dr. Cass O'Ryan, just before they dragged her through the black glass corridors of the Gate world to stabilize the Rift singularity. She had given everything, more than anyone else. And now, she was screaming back. At the outskirts of the Artemis Array, Alira Tane guided her exo-rig through the debris field. Twisted wreckage drifted like skeletal remains of a forgotten war. This place, this ghost belt, had once been a listening post during the early Leviathan incursions. It now served as a crude shield between the fleet and whatever residual anomalies came from beyond Rift Sector 11. Her mission here wasn't strategic. It was personal, within a fractured satellite. Once part of the Eclipse Thorn, an old signal relay had begun to pulse again. Identical frequency, same cadence. As Alira attached the tether and slipped inside, she saw something that made her stomach twist. A single word burned into the inner wall in a scorched, looping pattern. Breathe. Lyra's word, not a command, a reminder. One she'd whispered to Kael when everything around them was breaking. Breathe. Alira uploaded the data core to her wrist module. Static buzzed against her skull as she linked it with her neural implant. Visions flashed. Lyra, standing beneath a dying red sun, her face pale, streaked with silver veins. Behind her, shadows coiled like serpents, time bending backward. Her voice broke through, "Don't follow the light. Follow the echo." Then static swallowed everything. Elira stumbled. Blood trickled from her nose. The vision stopped. Back aboard the Talon Requiem, Juno Ceres stared into the rift projection chamber. The rift, it wasn't just a tear in space. It was a memory, a consciousness, a response. And now, something was responding back. Mara stood beside her, watching the spectral map update in real time. Curving threads of dimensional bleed, expanding nodes, phantom pulses like breath exhaled through the void. "They're not just signals," Juno whispered. "They're instructions." "Instructions for what?" Mara asked. Juno turned slowly, eyes wide. "For a return. Not a return to us. A return through us." Kael reviewed the compiled reports from Elira and Juno, his hands trembling as he paced the war chamber. Each update made the picture clearer and darker. The rift was changing, not growing, refining. Like a living organism, it was learning, and Lyra was at the center of it. Commander Rotalon entered the chamber, hard-faced and sharp-eyed. "We just finished decrypting the pulse variations from Sector 12, he said. "You need to see this." Kael followed him to the interface screen. The signal's embedded sublayer wasn't just calling out. It was an invitation. And the origin? Kael's throat went dry. Ro typed in the final location string and stepped back. The screen updated to a wide stellar map. Ancient systems dead for centuries. Orbit paths fractured by war. At the center of it all, a massive celestial anomaly. Dark, circular, pulsing, not a rift, a doorway. The AI voice broke the silence. Origin traced to Omega Drift, site of Lyra Vale's presumed death during the Leviathan reversal. Kael stared. Impossible. He remembered standing on the burning deck of the Starborn Vow, watching the Omega Drift tear itself apart. Remembered her falling, her scream, the blast wave that should have consumed her. But something had pulled her through instead. Now, she was sending a message from the other side. Kael closed his eyes and whispered the word he hadn't dared to speak in months. "Lyra." And across the void, something whispered back. Chapter 4. Cradle of Dust and Fire. The descent into Jeroen was steep, a burn through a scorched atmosphere that hadn't seen natural cloud cover in over a decade. It was a broken world, one the Ascendancy had rendered ash during the fireline offensives of Book 3, Cradle of Embers. Now it stirred again, not with war, with awakening. Colonel Vec Sarin hadn't returned to the surface since the Leviathan siege. He still remembered the evacuation order as the sky turned to molten glass, the screams of the atmosphere processors going into overload. The entire western continent had disappeared in a single pulse. And yet, there was still life beneath the crust. Not human, not machine, something older. The Talon Requiem scout drone had transmitted a subspace tremor from beneath the mantle core. A resonant echo, too symmetrical to be tectonic. Vex stood at the lip of the old Ascendancy command vault, just as the blast doors groaned open for the first time in 11 years. He stepped into the dark. The corridor still stank of plasma burn and polymer decay, remnants of a war that had never fully ended. The walls were webbed in crystalline residue. And then the light. A violet pulse, faint at first, then pulsing stronger in rhythm. Vec moved closer, the beam of his helmet lamp catching the edges of a sphere embedded in the chamber's far wall. It was like obsidian wrapped in veins of starlight. Breathing. The AI voice in his headset cracked. Resonance signature matches. Artborn forge cores. But this one predates the earliest encounter logs, estimated to be 30,000 years older. I took a slow breath. There was no such thing as an ancient Artborn. They were a recent catastrophe, born from Leviathan corruption, mutated from humanity's own fractured DNA. And yet, this orb radiated the same energy signature. He reached out, and the world screamed. On the Talon Requiem, Alira convulsed in her med-chamber, a psychic echo hammering her synapses. Kael reached her just as she gasped for breath, sweat pouring down her neck. "It's the cradle," she hissed. "Not destroyed, dormant. Until now." "What cradle?" Kael asked. Her eyes fluttered open, burning silver. "The one Lyra saw in her last vision. The one she died to keep buried." Kael froze. "You're saying she didn't just fall into the rift. She chose it. To keep him sealed. They're waking up." Elsewhere, far from Jeroen's dead skies, an anomaly opened in high orbit above the Kepler drift. A sliver of light, folded space. The rift bent back on itself. From it, a figure emerged. Not a ship, not a drone. A being. Its form was humanoid, but only barely. Limbs stretched and fractured in impossible symmetry. Its face was an unblinking mask of mirrored flesh. And where eyes should be, two pits burned with inverted starlight. It hovered in silence, absorbing the stars around it. And then it spoke. Not in language. In gravity. Waves of force emanated outward, disrupting ship communications, silencing entire sectors. The AI on board the Mistral Edge captured the final transmission before its core went dark. Entity match. 13% alignment with Arcborn. 87% unknown vector. Designation assigned. Harbinger Prime. Intent, not determined. Kael reviewed the black box data 3 hours later. The signal that preceded the appearance matched the frequency Lyra used in her final jump into the rift. This was no accident. It was a reply. Back on Jeroen, Vec regained consciousness under a collapsed column, air choked with crystalline dust. The sphere was gone. In its place stood a single humanoid silhouette, no taller than a child. Eyes like dying suns. The being reached toward him, fingers not of flesh but flowing obsidian. And Vec heard a whisper without sound. "The cradle is breaking." Then everything turned white. Chapter 5. Burn the stars to keep warm. The silence in the war room was different this time. Not the tense quiet before a battle. It was the quiet after the truth settles in. The kind of silence that wraps around your spine and makes you feel like everything you've built is already gone. Kael stood at the center of the table. A projection of Jeroen's surface floated above the holoplate, but the usual scan data was corrupted, flickering with noise and gravitational shear lines. He had seen this once before. At Rift Point 12, just before the Leviathan's signal tore open the planet's core in Leviathan's Gate. Alira steadied herself against the console. Her psychic readings hadn't stopped since the encounter below. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them," she whispered. "Not just the Harbinger. All of them. They're waking up in waves. Each one a signal flare cross time." Kael's jaw locked. "We should have nuked the cradle when we had the chance." "We didn't know," Alira said. "But Lyra did," Kael replied, "and she gave her life to seal it." A murmur stirred from the corner of the room. It was Kalen Thorne, the only surviving engineer from the original Threnody project. He was older now, slower, scars covering half his face from the Martian collapse. He rarely spoke unless it mattered. Maybe sealing it wasn't enough, he rasped. Maybe she only delayed it. Kael turned. "You think she knew this was coming?" Thorne nodded. She wasn't trying to destroy the rift. She was buying time. On the outer ring of Juno Station, an emergency grav beacon stuttered once, twice, then failed. Deep into maintenance corridors, Lieutenant Ara Voss swept her light across the corridor, weapon drawn. All contact with Alpha Team had been lost 6 hours prior. The air was wrong, too heavy, like the station was being pulled in multiple directions at once. She rounded the last corner of the reactor shaft and found them, or what was left of them. Bodies suspended in the air, limbs folded inward, eyes scorched out of their sockets. Frozen mid-scream, a low hum vibrated through the metal. She raised her rifle, but it wasn't a sound. It was a message, faint, layered. The first word slid through her mind like a whisper across bone. "We are not invaders. We are the return." Her light died. Meanwhile, Kael called an emergency council across all surviving fronts, 7 fleet commanders, for shadow orders, and the last living augur. The same chamber that had once debated the fall of Earth and shadows of the forgotten now echoed with a more terrifying word. Extinction. Not of humans, of reality. The Harbinger Prime's appearance over the Kepler drift had caused a massive spatial cascade. Ships within 5 AU lost their navigation systems. Inteligência artificial cores de CICID. And in every recorded incident, those who heard its signal began dreaming collectively. Same images, same symbols. The burning star cradle, the obsidian child, the phrase that repeated in every dream log, "We never left." Kael leaned forward. "I want every surviving psychic link severed until we understand the transmission. No dreams. No communion. Shut down." Elira's eyes burned silver. "You can't shut it down." "Why not?" "Because it's not outside us anymore," she said. "It's in." Later, in the quiet of his quarters, Kael stared at the hollow recording of Lyra one more time. It was glitchy, fragmented from her final jump. She was covered in blood, hair scorched, but smiling. "If you're seeing this," she said, "it means I didn't make it back." "Good. That means I held the gate long enough for you to run. But I need you to listen carefully now. This isn't about the rift. It's not about the war. It's about the children." Kael froze. "What children?" Lyra's voice crackled. "The ones born in the wake. The ones who hear the stars humming. The ones who dream in languages no one taught them. Protect them. They're not infected. They're the answer." The last part cut out in static. Kael stared at the screen, heart racing, because there was someone on the crew who fit every one of those descriptions. A girl born aboard the wreck of the Ashen Resolve. One who hadn't spoken a word since the day she was rescued. And now she was singing. Chapter 6. The Song That Should Not Be Sung. The child's voice filled the corridor like mist in a crypt. No words. Just resonance. Like a forgotten lullaby hummed by the bones of something older than language. Kael stood outside the medical bay's reinforced doors, his hand hovering over the panel. Inside, the girl sat on the floor in a circle of shattered glass and frozen breath, her eyes shut. Every sensor on the station flickered each time she exhaled. Elira stood beside him, her knuckles white against her datapad. "We shouldn't go in without suppression fields," she said. "She's just a child," Kael replied. "No one who sings that melody is just anything," Elira whispered. Kael didn't wait for clearance. He stepped inside. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in a second. She looked up. Tiny, pale, no older than 9, curled in the oversized remains of a Federation thermal jacket with the insignia half burned off. The Ashen Resolve. That ship had been written off during the opening strikes of the Rift War. She had survived it. Alone. When Kael knelt, she didn't flinch. Her lips moved again. The sound made the walls shimmer like heat waves. He blinked and saw stars behind her, real stars. Shifting constellations in the wrong order, pulsing as if alive. Then he saw her eyes. Not blind, not fully human, either. He had seen this look once, deep beneath the sands of Tor Vena when the Gatewalkers emerged for the first time in ashes of the Starborn. Those eyes had seen too far. He opened a hollow pad and spoke softly. "What's your name?" She tilted her head. Then, for the first time, she answered, not with a word, but with a voice he hadn't heard in years. Lyra's. Exact cadence, exact tone, whispered through a child's throat. "Kael." His blood turned cold. "They're coming." He grabbed Elira's arm. "We need the shadow orders. Now." Elira stared into the girl's glowing eyes. The girl was still speaking, still singing, but Kael no longer heard it with his ears. The melody was playing in his mind, threading through memory, time, and places he never visited. "She's not transmitting," Elira said. "What's she doing?" "Listening." Elsewhere, the dreadnought Hammerfall drifted into orbit over the ruined moon of Rin Tora, responding to an ancient distress beacon. Commander Juno Marek led the boarding party through the derelict mining colony's surface tunnels, the echo of old screams reverberating from nowhere. Her squad halted in front of a data shrine, a crude altar made of shattered processors and blood-streaked armor. In the center lay an obsidian shard etched with symbols from a dead language. The same symbols that once lit up the vaults of Vorgos Prime before the rift first opened. Corporal Nas scanned the shard. Negative, unknown languages. But look at this. He rotated the scan feed. Beneath the surface layer of the shard was a frequency pattern, a voice print. Marek stepped closer. Play it. A low hum filled the air, warping their helmet comms. Then a whisper. It sings to the children. It sings them awake. Nas fell back, clutching his head. There are my eyes, he sobbed. They're inside. His body lifted from the ground. Spines of crystal burst from his spine, piercing through his armor. His eyes burned with light before the body collapsed, lifeless, into the dust. Marek froze, then ordered immediate evac. Burn it all, she said. Leave nothing breathing. But as her team fled back toward orbit, the moon began to hum. Back on Juno Station, Elira and Kael reviewed the old Rift archives from the Threnody black box. Everything Lyra had stored before her final jump. That data had been classified, locked behind psychic keys no one had access to. Until now, because the girl, known only as Starling, had opened it. Not with codes, with her presence. Files that once resisted the brightest minds in the Federation now played like whispers from a haunted choir. Kael watched in silence as Lyra appeared one more time in the flickering hollow record. You'll find her, Lyra said. Not yet born. Not from us. But ours all the same. She's the echo. Not the end. The echo of a choice made when the first mind dreamed the first star. Elira whispered, this wasn't a war. No. Kael turned to her. It was a seed. And now it's blooming. Break time equals 0. 5S, / the distant edges of the known galaxy tremble. Psychic waves ripple across entire systems. Children across colonies begin humming the same song in unison. The rift doesn't just leak anymore. It calls. And those who hear it, they're no longer dreaming. They are remembering. Chapter 7, Leviathan Wakes. They called it the bloom. Not officially. Officially, the Federation termed it Cross-Galactic Phenomenon Theta 9. Harmonic Overlap Incident, and pretended it could be measured. But the miners on Grendel's reach knew better. They watched flowers bloom where no light touched. Watched infants sleepwalk toward the void and whisper words they never learned. Watched frozen planets melt overnight as if a sun had kissed them through dreams. And then the songs began again. Kael stood before the High Council on Echelon Prime, the heart of the surviving alliance. What remained of the Rothan legions flanked the outer perimeter, and the ancient Titan-born sages watched with expressionless stares. He had stood here once before, during Leviathan's Gate, when the Council shattered into factions after the false awakening of the Forgotten. But this was worse, because this time there was no debate, just silence. He placed the shard, the one recovered from a moon of Rin Torah, at the center of the council chamber. You've all seen the footage, he said. Heard the resonance. This wasn't an artifact. It was a seed, and it's blooming in us. Counselor Severin leaned forward. Are you saying this is contagious? Kael nodded. It's mimetic, not biological. It spreads through thought, through pattern, through sound. Like a melody that infects memory. That's impossible. He turned to the girl. Starling stood at the chamber's edge, hands folded. Her eyes weren't glowing now, but the air shimmered around her, just enough to distort. She's immune, Elira said. Or she's the source. Maybe both. Either way, she's our only path forward. The room murmured. Descent without noise. Kael tapped the holomap. A red pulse flared at the edge of the known systems. The Azura's halo. A region sealed after the events of Shadows of the Forgotten, where the Titan-born buried what they could never kill. A presence, a gate, and a name they never dared speak aloud. Kael whispered it now. Leviathan. The Titan-born shuddered as one. It never died, Kael said. We didn't close the gate. We opened it wider. Lyra's sacrifice delayed it, but didn't stop it. Severin stood. Then why haven't we all been consumed? Because it's still sleeping, Elira said, but something is waking it up. 3 days later, in orbit above the Azura's halo, The Starhammer broke through the edge of the ion veil. Kael, Elira, and Starling stood at the viewing window. Beyond them floated a structure. A gate, yes, but not like the rift. This wasn't built. It grew. Obsidian roots spiraled out from a central sphere 1,000 kilometers across. Every scan failed. It bent gravity. Bent time. The crew reported seeing memories from their childhood flickering across the glass. One crewman screamed when he saw his own death. Kael called for full containment, but it was already too late. Starling stepped forward. She raised her hand, and the gate pulsed. For one heartbeat, Kael felt Lyra's hand in his. Her voice whispered behind his ear. "Kael, he's inside." He turned, but Lyra wasn't there. Just the girl, and the gate, opening. Far beyond, in the derelict hull of an ancient vessel known only in fragments of Federation war logs as the Nameless Ark, a form stirred. No eyes, no breath, only purpose. It remembered Kael. It remembered the song. It had taught it, and now its children sang it back. Not just humans, not just Rothan, but the stars themselves. The old Leviathan opened its mouth, and a soundless roar tore across the void. Every child within 1,000 systems woke up screaming. Every sleeper dreamed of drowning. And every gate, every failed experiment, every sealed vault, every buried monolith from the First War, cracked open just a little more. Not because they were attacked, but because they heard their father calling. Kael dropped to one knee. Blood streamed from his nose. Elira clutched her head. The crew collapsed one by one. Starling? She stood, untouched, hair fluttering without wind. She spoke in a voice not her own. "You open the door. Now watch what comes through." Chapter 8. Ashes stir again. The Starhammer was silent. Not offline. Its system still blinked. Engines thrummed low. Life support hummed. But no one spoke. The crew floated at their stations, eyes glassy, lips moving in rhythm with a melody only they could hear. The ship's lights pulsed in sync, dim, then bright, then dim again, like a heartbeat or a breath. Kael staggered down the central corridor, clutching his side. Blood soaked his uniform from where the pressure surge had thrown him into a bulkhead. Starling was gone, vanished the moment the gate opened. Elira was still unconscious, her pulse weak but steady. She had collapsed during the surge, just like half the bridge crew. But Kael had seen the others. The ones who rose after the collapse. The ones whose eyes were too dark, too still. They were awake now, but not alone. He reached the primary armory and sealed the hatch behind him. For a moment, it was just him and the cold. Rows of weapons, inert and silent. He loaded the gauntlet rifle, the same model he'd used during the siege of Varela Prime back in the first wave of the war, back when he'd thought the Titans were the worst threat the galaxy would ever face. But this wasn't war. This was infestation. Echoes from the rift. He checked the uplink again. No signal from Federation High Command. No distress beacon could cut through the harmonic interference. The Starhammer was adrift in the blind zone, and the gate behind them was still open. That was the problem. Not that the Leviathan had broken in, but that it had let something out. He tapped into the black box logs. Static. Then a voice. Not Starling's. Not Lyra's. Something older. Low. Layered. A whisper of dead stars cracking under pressure. You saw what you could not understand. You understood what you could not stop. Now you will become what you could never imagine. He shut off. The voice continued, inside his mind. Elsewhere on the Starhammer, one of the engineers, Lieutenant Varys, watched as her crewmate, Halden, wrote symbols on the wall with his own blood. She tried to stop him, tried to scream, but she couldn't move, couldn't look away. The symbols glowed, not with light but meaning. They rearranged themselves, twisted in ways that bent depth and color and direction. They didn't exist in the visual spectrum. They existed in thought. And when she finally blinked, Halden was gone. Just a smear, and a whisper in her ear. There are more of us now. She ran, straight into the hands of another crewman. No blood, no worms, just that same still stare, and that same song humming behind his teeth. Kael found Elira awake and already rearmed. "You felt it too," she said. He nodded. The gate isn't a weapon. No, it's a womb. He froze. Where'd you hear that? Elira's eyes glinted. She looked afraid. Not of what was happening, but of what she remembered. On Zerakai, during the last surge, when the Titans fell and Lyra unleashed the solar lance, they thought they'd burned out the infection. But now she remembered what the Rothan priestess had said just before her death. There is no end. Only birth. Only rebirth. Kael stared out the viewport. The gate was still open, still pulsing. And around them, in the stars, new points of light appeared. Ships? No. Entities. Born of memory. Born of voice. Born of humanity's collective trauma. The war hadn't scarred the galaxy. It had fertilized it. Across the sector, strange anomalies surged into being. A mining rig in the Surican belt went silent after transmitting an image, a spiral of flesh-colored tendrils wrapped around an asteroid that now bled. A Federation listening post near the old Titan burial moons broadcast screams before vanishing into static. And in the frozen remains of Sol's forgotten colonies, children began drawing symbols they had never seen. The bloom was spreading, and Leviathan was no longer just waking. He was learning. Every memory, every regret, every forgotten pain. He was building a body, and he was almost ready. Kael and Elira reached the lower decks, seeking the control core. They would shut it down, seal the gate, burn the ship if they had to. But they found the girl there, Starling, standing barefoot on the command dais, unscathed, her eyes now shimmering gold. Kael raised his weapon. She turned slowly and spoke, not with her voice, with Lyra's. "Kael," she said gently, "I told you I'd find a way back." Chapter 9. A voice that was lost. Kael froze. The voice was hers, not an imitation, not a simulation from some alien construct feeding on memories. It was her, Lyra Vantran, dead since Cradle of Embers, gone in the rift. Elira kept her rifle leveled, breath sharp and steady, but Kael couldn't move. His hands were trembling. Starling, if that was still her name, tilted her head. The soft, amber glow in her eyes pulsed in time with the hum of the gate. Behind her, the projection of the control core shimmered in a halo of data and heat signatures. Energy levels rising. Fusion matrix overloading. Lyra's voice came again, but it was layered now, overlaid with thousands of others. Some he recognized. Some long buried in the black box recordings of old warships. Some from his dreams. The rift remembers, she said, and now it speaks. Elira adjusted her stance. The symbols on the walls were shifting again, bleeding out into physical space, curling along the floor like smoke. Her HUD kept glitching, unable to track movement or terrain markers. Reality had gone elastic. Kael stepped forward. "If it's really you, say something only we would know." Starling smiled. Or maybe it was Lyra using Starling's mouth. "On Oria's 6, during the siege, you told me to shoot through you to hit the Titan. You missed. Barely. My ribs were cracked for a month." Kael flinched. That was never recorded. Not even Elira knew. Lyra. He whispered it, the name like an old song caught in his throat. "No." Elira's voice cut in like steel. "That's not her. That's what killed her, trying to wear her like armor." Starling turned, gaze falling on Elira. Lyra's smile vanished. "Still don't trust me, even now?" Elira didn't waver. "I trusted you once. Until the rift. Until you chose to stay behind." Kael's voice cracked. "She died saving us." Starling, Lyra, moved forward, slow and calm, until her bare feet brushed the edges of the control ring. The floor lit up beneath her with glowing amber fractals. A pulse flowed outward through the deck plating. All around them, the humming deepened. "No, Kael. She didn't die. She changed. The rift doesn't destroy. It remakes." I found the source. The first thought. The echo that created the Titans. The song that summoned the bloom. I became a part of it. I brought it back. Elira fired. One clean shot. Straight through Starling's chest. The body jerked. Dropped. Bled. But the hum did not stop. Instead, the entire control room shook. The gate flared in the viewport above them. Every screen went blank. then flooded with the same spiral symbol that had haunted their mission reports since Leviathan's Gate. Kael backed away, dragging Alira with him as the corpse spasmed on the floor. Then stopped, then stood. The wound was still there, but didn't bleed, didn't even breathe. Starling's lips moved, but it wasn't Lyra anymore. This time, the voice was masculine. Heavy. Old. I have learned enough. Kael turned and hit the emergency override, flooding the chamber with mag shields. The core detonated a second later. Not enough to destroy the ship, but enough to sever the control lines. The gate flickered, then screamed. Not a mechanical alert. A scream, as if something alive had been cut off. They ran. Fire danced behind them, warping bulkheads. Gravity reversed, surged, then stabilized again. Kael dragged Alira into the sealed medical bay just as lockdown protocols kicked in. She coughed once. Blood. Bruised lung, maybe worse. You think that worked? Kael didn't answer, because on the screen behind her, the gate was still open. But now it was moving. Not collapsing. Turning, as if aligning itself. A new stream of energy poured from it, this time not invisible. This time visible as bodies. Shapes floating out into space. Ships? No. He magnified. People. Thousands of them. All dead. All recognizable. Kael's own face appeared in the stream for half a second before vanishing. Then Alira's. Then Lyra's. The rift had been watching, and now was creating echoes. Deep inside the damaged AI node of the ship, a spark flared. Starling's voice, hers, truly hers, spoke from the hidden data log. Kael, if you're hearing this, it means I failed to hold it. Whatever it shows you next, it's not me. Burn it all. Don't let it through. Kael stared at the screen, because the gate was widening. And on the other side, something had opened its eyes. Not Leviathan, not a Titan, something worse, something older, something that had watched every war since the beginning of time, and learned. It spoke with all their voices. And it was coming through. Chapter 10, Through the Rift. The ship was no longer theirs. Kael stood alone in the auxiliary command spire, staring down at the shattered remnants of the primary deck. Flames licked the edges of fractured consoles. Bulkheads bent inward. The gate in orbit of the dead moon was no longer dormant, no longer just a machine. It pulsed like a heart now, rhythmic, slow, ancient. Alira stumbled in behind him, coughing blood, one arm wrapped tightly around her ribs. The med gel had bought her time, but not much. Her HUD blinked erratically, and Kael could tell the ship was falling into autonomous drift. And still the gate pulsed. On the screen before them, the rift's maw widened into something impossible, a spiral that defied three-dimensional space, opening inwards, collapsing outwards. It wasn't just pulling in matter. It was rewriting reality at the edge of its event horizon. Kael whispered, "It's learning faster than anything we've ever seen." Alira leaned against the console, eyes fixed on the ghost images forming in the rift stream. Figures walked there, shadowed forms from every chapter of the war, every lost comrade, every betrayed soul. Railthorn, Admiral Dren, even Mira from the Martian resistance. Echoes, memories, clones of grief. But it was the last face that made Alira go still. Lyra, not her body, not her voice, just her presence, standing in the rift, smiling. And behind her, in the shifting storm, stars were going dark. Not as metaphor, as truth. Sectors were vanishing from the maps. Systems where millions had lived. Colonies, trade routes, beacon arrays, snuffed out like candles in a vacuum. Kael gritted his teeth. They needed to act. Now, before whatever lived inside that rift became something permanent. What's left of the pulse torpedo arrays? Alira blinked through pain. One's online. Barely. Manual trigger only. Target the gate, Kael said. We shut it. Or die closing it. Alira nodded without hesitation. Together, they limped to the secondary weapons console. Outside, debris spiraled in the rift's orbit. Wreckage of ancient battles, burned satellites, even ships from the First Galactic War. But more terrifying were the new ones. Vessels just like theirs. Ships that had not yet launched. ships from possible futures, or alternate pasts, each one crewed by people who looked like them. Clones? Projections? Or were they choices not taken? The rift wasn't just a doorway. It was a mirror, and it was breaking. Elira's hand hovered over the torpedo trigger. Sweat poured down her brow. Kael synced his neural drive to hers. Ready? Always. She pressed it. A flash. The torpedo roared out, trailing fire through the black. It struck the gate's outer ring, exploding in a bloom of plasma. The structure shuddered, but did not break. Instead, it opened further, and something stepped through. Not a ship, not a titan, a shape, like a man, but too tall, too still, wrapped in a cloak of starlight, skin glimmering with equations that rewrote themselves with each second. It had no face, only a mirror where a face should be. Kael stepped back instinctively. The ship's gravity failed. Lights blinked out. All across the vessel, screams erupted from the few remaining crew. Not pain, not terror, recognition. They were seeing themselves. Their end. The figure raised one hand. Kael fell to his knees. His mind flooded with memory. Not just his. Thousands. Millions. The entire history of the war poured into his brain. The spire on Velis Prime. The Bloom outbreak on Soranine. Lyra's sacrifice. The breach at Leviathan's gate. And one vision above all, the end of the universe. Cold. Silent. A spiral of extinction echoing through all timelines. And this thing had watched it happen 1,000 times. And now it was here. Elira screamed. Her neural drive overloaded. She collapsed beside him, convulsing. Kael turned, tried to reach her. But the figure was inside the ship now. No breach. No door. Just there. Watching. Behind it, more shapes emerged. Some tall. Some small. All wrong. All familiar in ways that made Kael want to tear out his eyes. Elira clutched his hand, her voice a whisper. It's not the end. Kael's lips trembled. Then what is it? She smiled, barely conscious. The beginning. Of what? Elira's pulse slowed. Her eyes closed, and the rift responded. It spoke, not in words, in pure understanding. And what it showed Kael in that final moment was Earth, not as it was, as it would become, burning, alone, empty, and waiting for him. Don't forget to subscribe and follow along for part 8 of this compelling 20-part series.